Okay, welcome everyone to this first of a 6-week series called Overheard. It's conversations of pastors with friends, and it's part of our Lenten series here at Harvard Avenue Christian Church. We're glad that you all who are with us live streaming could be with us at this hour of the day to join us for this first of several conversations. Before we get started too much further, I want to point out that we'll have a short time of Q&A at the end of these sessions for those of you who are tuned in live. So if you do have a question during this conversation, feel free to type that into the comments area on the YouTube page, and we'll try to get around to as many of those as we can at the end of our time together. I am so pleased that we're starting off this Overheard series by beginning to discuss a beloved partner in our congregation's ministry, which is Week of Compassion. Week of Compassion is the Relief, Refugee, and Development Mission Fund of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And tonight we're joined by the Reverend Caroline Hamilton-Arnold, Associate Director for Domestic Disaster Response. I understand, Caroline, you've been working with Week of Compassion since 2016. Okay, and Caroline helps us as disciples in the United States and Canada prepare for and respond to natural disasters. But she's also found herself kind of in the midst of a crisis because she's from Houston, Texas. I know you all have had a lot of challenge in this last week with all of the power outages and the water issues around the cold snap. So sending our love out to you, your family, and all those in Texas affected by that, and probably something we'll want to discuss tonight, just to give an example of how Week of Compassion helps us step in as the hands and feet of Christ in times of need like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to turn it over to you, Caroline. If you would tell us just a little bit about Week of Compassion and show us how you all help us connect to needs around the world.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and folks from Harvard Avenue. It's so great to be with you. We had been in conversation early last year about having this connection time in person, and then the world turned upside down. And so I'm really grateful for the time to be able to do it virtually. And sometime I'll get back to Tulsa and see you all in person again. As you so ably said, Week of Compassion is the Relief, Refugee, and Development Mission Fund for the Disciples of Christ. We work with partners to alleviate suffering around the world. And we have the beloved history within the Disciples of Christ, the witness of many generations within the disciples that bring us our name, because the Week of Compassion used to be a week. Now we are Week of Compassion, a ministry of the church working around the world around the year. And so the generosity of disciples across generations and in many different expressions through the life of the church make possible our work of connecting resources from disciples to places of need and crisis around the world. Sometimes those resources are informational. It's sharing stories. It's connecting folks with FEMA assistance or with other kinds of information. Often it's financial. We are, in fact, a mission fund. And always it's relational. It's connecting disciples and other communities. It's connecting communities within themselves, helping people find the right partners, and helping disciples find partners to be engaged in the work of relief, refugee assistance, and sustainable development.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that strikes me, Caroline, is just the network that you all as Week of Compassion allow us to tap into when there's need. I wouldn't have a clue who to call and how to be assistance, but I trust that the resources that we offer are meeting people at the point of deepest need at that time because of that relationality. So that's something that really sticks out in my mind when I think about Week of Compassion, is that network.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the partnerships and relationships are foundational to what we do. It's a theological commitment that we have. It's part of our disciple identity, part of that ecumenical relationship that we have, part of a theological commitment to say God is already working in every community where we will be working. And so going and finding what God is doing, watching for the ways our partners are already engaged. And then there's a practical component to it as well. As you said, we can't all know all the partners everywhere, but because we can connect through Week of Compassion and through the different networks that have been built over time, we're able to find those partners. And it does allow us to be present in far more places than if our individual selves or our individual congregations were trying to respond on our own.
Wonderful. Well, Caroline, I'm going to let you take it away. For those who are not as familiar with Week of Compassion, if you just give us kind of the rundown, and I know you want to share your screen.
I'll share some pictures because pictures are fun. As I said, we're the Relief, oh goodness, it's been a week. Relief, Refugee, and Development Mission Fund for the Disciples of Christ, which means our work falls into three major categories. We have the relief, which is mostly response to natural and human-caused disasters. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, a woman exiting a latrine in Indonesia on the island of Sulawesi after the tsunami that happened, about 2 years ago. Our partners through Church World Service helped to build latrines pretty quickly, get access to water and sanitation and hygiene opportunities for folks who were displaced by that disaster, and therefore prevent that cascade of disasters with disease and health concerns that can come after a disaster if there's not appropriate hygiene. On the top right is one of our domestic disaster responses out in Pamlico County, North Carolina, working with the long-term recovery group there, with our partners through the Church of the Brethren and Brethren Disaster Ministries, partnering with Camp Caroline and the North Carolina region. Just a fabulous, fabulous partnership there. You can read more about that. There was a story that came out and is on our email newsletter and our website blog, if you want to hear more about that response. The sort of second area of our work is refugee assistance. So that is both support for resettlement here in the US through resettlement offices and support for congregations as they are trying to connect with opportunities to serve newly resettled refugees, and then largely humanitarian assistance for refugees internationally. So the bottom right picture is from Jordan, where our partners were helping to distribute really basic needs in response to the pandemic. So hygiene supplies and some basic food necessities to refugee communities, mostly from Syria and Iraq, who are located in Jordan. And that's one of our global ministries partners. And then the third area is really around sustainable development for communities. This is where we're trying to address some of the crises that come from extreme poverty in our world. And so these delightful children are using a new hand washing station installed at an elementary school in Vietnam. We've been doing lots of work, again, through Church World Service partners, with water and sanitation in rural areas of Vietnam. So that kind of gives a snapshot of those three broad areas of work. This infographic is based on our assessment of our 2020 distribution, which was the highest in more than a decade for Week of Compassion, in part because of the incredible generosity of disciples who saw a moment of crisis and extreme need as the pandemic made all of our work more difficult and more important. While disasters continued to happen and displacement of people continued to happen in the midst of a global pandemic, we were able to really step up for our partners and increase support to several of our partners when they really needed it. And we had some really strong financial resources that give us a good foundation. And so we were able to stretch our budget a bit in 2020, which was really a wonderful thing to be able to support our partners. you can see this sort of breakdown of where the monies go. And I'll just give you a second to look at the numbers.
That's just really an incredible response, Caroline. And there truly is such a great deal of need. It's really awesome to see just how far those dollars can stretch for all of the different pieces that you all are addressing on our behalf. Is there ever the sense that that's just kind of an overwhelming task to juggle all of that?
I'd be lying if I said no. I read Jeremiah a lot in those moments, and I go and I cry. But I also see the witness of the church. I get to see the church at its best. And so there's great hope and in these responses as well. And we've seen the fruits of the work. I mean, I work in domestic disaster response, so the fruits of the work are kind of immediate and obvious in front of our faces as people get to move back into their homes or have immediate relief after a winter storm cuts off their power and their water, and we're able to get resources to them through local churches. But we've also seen through this pandemic the ways that the existing relationships and existing work that we've done over years and in some places decades positioned communities to respond better, to be less vulnerable. They had access to clean water, to practice good hand washing, which became so much more important over the past year. We had partners who were able to, as so many of us have, pivot what they've been doing to respond to new needs because of the pandemic. So the investment that we've made in local capacity paid dividends this past year, which was great to see. I do want to highlight a couple things about the breakdown of percentages here. One is there's a whole new category if you compare this to some of the past infographics, in that there's a domestic COVID-19 response. We were able to provide some direct assistance to disciple households who were experiencing extreme financial distress, and then also through disciple congregations who were providing feeding ministries and helping to feed their neighbors through this pandemic. So that's a new category on this infographic. The disaster and emergency response piece is a little bigger than in some past years. In part because of the pandemic, there were more emergency needs, especially internationally, that are reflected in that piece. There's also an important thing about that number, in that we had significant distributions from some designated lines, in particular Hurricane Harvey and the two other 2017 hurricanes that affected Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And so we had significant distributions for those ongoing recoveries that feel so long ago now for some of us, but are still very, very present for the communities still recovering. And we are able to provide that sustained presence and sustained support. And so some of those funds that came in 2017 are going out into communities even still in 2021, because we've made a commitment to stay through as long as possible, as long as we are needed, until we don't have any more funds. The other piece is that sustainable development's a little smaller in the percentages, and part of that was because of the pandemic. Some programs had to pause or scale back because the movement of people was restricted, and so restricted some of those programs. So it'll be even more important this year and in the coming years for us to invest in those programs, and we're in conversation with partners about what that needs to look like going forward.
Yeah, it really strikes me when you spoke about Harvey. Our congregation I was so proud of the response that we offered, even 2 Week of Compassion for that. And that, unfortunately, there's been so much in front of us since then. I have to admit, I almost lost track of that. To know that you all are offering sustainable support for these disasters that don't just go away when the news stops covering them is, I think, so valuable. Again, a way I feel comfortable about partnering with Week of Compassion because of the follow-up and the sustainability of the effort, the commitment to that is, I think, just it's so important to this kind of work. So I appreciate you bringing up that disaster and that there's continued support for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I forgot that I had a zoomed in version. Sorry, they're the bigger numbers and bigger text. I wanted to just highlight a few of our other ongoing responses and places where we're engaged. As you mentioned, Texas had quite a storm, which we were not really prepared for. We are not set up for extreme winter weather. And I am from Texas originally, and in my however many years of life, I don't remember ever seeing winter storm warnings in every county across Texas, but that's what we got last week. And then we had some infrastructure meltdowns. And so it had significant impact across the state of Texas. 77 counties, last I checked, have been declared for individual assistance with FEMA. So that just gives a sense of the scope across the state. And we have had an incredible response from disciples, both helping each other out. The picture on the right is from one of our disciples in Houston who had damage at their home. And members from the church showed up, helped them muck out, helped them connect with a plumber and get assistance to be able to stay in their home while they're making repairs. And then on the left, you see a supply distribution pulled together from Northway Christian Church in Dallas in collaboration with other churches in the area, synagogue, to serve some of the folks in the area who didn't have access to water, or at least not potable water during the storm. They had some food supplies and other necessities as well. And so Week of Compassion in our domestic disaster response work kind of operate in two modes. And the first mode in these early days and weeks is really in and through our local congregations. Y'all are our first partners in the event of disasters. So this is where I get on my little soapbox about preparedness. So if you don't have a disaster preparedness plan, maybe we should schedule a time to talk about Harvard Avenue's disaster preparedness. Because you're in a better position to serve your neighbors if you've done some of that work and thinking beforehand. We provide grant support for households, churches, and then community relief efforts. And then there's that long-term recovery piece, as we highlighted with Harvey and with Pamlico County in North Carolina and so many other places across the country. And so we are going to be in conversation with the Southwest region and with congregations and our ecumenical partners to see what the long-term needs are going to be from this winter storm. And we will be finding ways to have the greatest impact as disciples, as people recover. As Texas was experiencing that, there was also a massive mudslide and flood event in India, in the northern part of India. And we have partners through Global Ministries and who are also members of ACT Alliance, which is one of our international networks of partners, CASA. And they have been distributing basic supplies, food and water and hygiene supplies and solar lanterns and basic shelter, tarp tents for folks who have been displaced by this disaster, which was another kind of compound natural disaster that caused infrastructure failure. And we have been able to have some fairly rapid presence in providing relief there because of that existing relationship with CASA. And I also wanted to highlight one of our COVID-19 responses internationally. This is one of our partners through Church World Service in Cambodia, where they have been providing some really crucial cash assistance and food assistance for highly vulnerable households that they were already working with through another program. And so they already had trust in the community. They already had an awareness of some of the most vulnerable folks and who would really struggle just to meet basic needs. because of their employment situations and just some different dynamics in that community. And so Church World Service was able to provide some really wonderful immediate response. And we're grateful for that partnership. I will stop my sharing here.
So, Caroline, we've already got a wondering here from my head, which is about giving. You all attend to so many different needs around the world, even domestically. And it brings to mind questions that I have around giving donations and gifts, designated, undesignated, what gives Week of Compassion the most latitude? What is your experience with that?
Yeah. Well, I say whatever's going to inspire you to give the most, give that way. So if it is designating to a particular storm or type of response, then give that. But alongside that, undesignated gifts give us the flexibility to respond even when things are not making the news, even when things are maybe not getting the kind of groundswell of support that other events do. I just sent out a grant today to a church that had a fire, and it made the local news, but it certainly isn't going to receive national attention, and we're not going to get designated funds for it. But we're going to be able to help them make up the difference between what their insurance is covering and what it's actually going to cost to repair their church. The response in India may or may not have gotten significant designated responses. We haven't gotten financial reports for this month yet. But we're able to be more nimble and flexible when we have undesignated funding. When folks do give undesignated dollars, a portion of that goes to our administrative costs. As you saw on the previous slide, we work really hard to keep those low. We work through our partners for that practical reason as well. It helps us keep our overhead down. And we have a fantastic endowment. I believe Harvard Avenue contributes to that. And the return from the endowment held at the Christian Church Foundation helps to offset some of our administrative costs, as well as providing funds directly for programmatic ministry. And so all of those types of giving together are really crucial. And designated gifts, I do want to say this, are 100% directed to the place where they're designated. So it will go to affected communities. If you say US storms this week, to go to Texas or to other parts of the country affected by this winter storm, 100% of those dollars go to assist those affected communities. So that's a good thing to know.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm wondering about the relational network that you all have in response to these needs. I imagine that you all are continually scanning the horizon and the news for disasters and then calling up people within the network. I'm wondering if you all, though, ever are asked to do any kind of relief that you don't cover and how you respond to that. That's a tricky one. And I ask that question because even at the local level, we wrestle with as a church and a community of faith with what choices we make in a world with so much need and how we focus our efforts. Could you speak a little bit to how Week of Compassion wades those waters?
Yeah, those are the days when I end up crying in my office. But there are also days when we rely on other networks that we have. So, for example, we have gotten some requests from churches that are doing outreach programs with youth. and they're serving highly vulnerable populations living below the poverty line. But our domestic work doesn't include that. Our poverty and intervention work is international. And so with requests like that, I know to refer them to NBA, National Benevolent Association, the Health and Social Service Ministry of the Disciples of Christ, because they have programs for support for youth, for ministries that work with the under 18 populations and elderly populations. Internationally, that's part of why we are connected with things like the World Council of Churches and ACT Alliance. And I'm not in the decision making as closely with some of those requests, but a lot of times it's an evaluation of who else is investing. Are they getting close to meeting the kind of minimum budget that they've put forward? Do we have relationship with the partners? Do we trust the partners who are on the ground doing the implementation? And there's a whole kind of host of evaluative questions that our executive director, V. Nguyen, goes through when he's making those decisions. For our sustainable development work, we rely on our committee, and Harvard Avenue has lent some wonderful leadership to our committee and now our board of stewards over the years. Most recently, Mark Briley served on our committee and board and was a wonderful servant, and they help to make those decisions. They receive the grant proposals and evaluate them and help us discern where to invest the money that has been entrusted to us. And with disasters, a lot of times we are looking at where the community is not being served, where are the places that are not getting as much attention, what counties are getting overlooked in a multi-county event, or what neighborhoods are getting overlooked. Are there folks with extreme vulnerabilities who are not getting the services and resources that they need? And we try to direct our funding there because we can have a greater impact with our limited dollars. There's also a piece to where we have disciples engaged actively on the ground, because where we have churches and disciples as part of the process, we want to invest in those partnerships as well. So yeah, lots of competing factors.
Sure. I'm wondering also, really on a more personal level, you've been serving with Week of Compassion since 2016. I think I understand you grew up in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Did.
So within the denomination, that is, for those who are not familiar with what that is. And was this something that was always on your radar? How did you end up coming to serve as you do in ministry?
Yeah. Well, I went to seminary anticipating going on to get a PhD. I said I was not going into congregational ministry, and God laughed at me and sent me into a congregation. I did congregational ministry for a few years, and I said, oh, well, this is pretty cool. Maybe I'll stick with this. And then God laughed at me again and said, no, this is where you're headed. I had loved Week of Compassion as long as I can remember. I was a little kid with my coin box coming up on Week of Compassion Sunday, bringing my quarters. And I always remember thinking that this work was one of the truest ways that the church was present in the world. And one of the ways we could really be church well. And so I have always loved the ministry of Week of Compassion. And then it brought together some of my interests and skills. And it was an opportunity to serve the church in a different way. And so I jumped in and learned a lot really fast, because you can read about disaster response, but you don't really learn it till you do it. And so it's been a steep learning curve over the past 5 years, but it's been a delightful one.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying what you did about, getting to see the church working at its best in terms of this collective response. Because so often I think it's easy for us to think at the local congregational level. I trust that congregations everywhere are doing really great and important work within their immediate community, even globally. But the idea that we could pull the kind of resources together as the church with the capital C, to pool our resources to make a bigger impact is really, to me, also part of what makes church at its best.
Yeah,
To see how
absolutely.
all the grapes connect to the vine, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. And
now,
then you see that happening on an even bigger scale because you have the church as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and all of our expressions in regions and congregations and individuals contributing to Week of Compassion. And we're able to do so much more together than we would apart. But then Week of Compassion is part of these bigger bodies of the church universal, and the ways that we are able to partner ecumenically just are able to magnify those gifts even greater. And it's such a heartening thing to me, because even when we are squabbling about, don't get me wrong, important theological issues, those seem to go by the wayside when we step into a community that's been flooded, and we walk right alongside the Orthodox community and the Bible Church and the Disciple Church and the UCC. And we're all around the table together saying our neighbors need us. And this is the witness that we are called to as followers of Jesus Christ, to serve our neighbors, to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And so that is an encouragement to me in the work. There was something else I was going to say about that, but it'll come to me.
so we do have also a question from the audience, which is, how closely do you work with first responders for disaster relief?
That's a really good question. So in the immediate days of a disaster, especially when the event is going on and in those first days following, there are capital F, capital R first responders who have been specially trained to do the life-saving work that needs to happen. And usually we say, unless you are also a specially trained person, step back and just listen to whatever they're saying. That said, we do have congregations that are in collaboration and agreements with emergency management offices and police stations and fire departments and local hospitals, so that they can serve alongside those first responders. There is a congregation in North Carolina, and the name of the church is escaping my mind right now. And so I'm sorry to Andrew Shue, who is the pastor there. But they had an agreement with the hospital. And so when certain flood events happen, it's not possible to get from one side of town to the hospital. The bridges get flooded. And so they set up a mobile clinic in the parking lot of the church. And it is a sight to behold. And the church houses most of the staff and many of the other responders. And then they have these massive tents to set up and be a full running clinic. And so that's a great example. There are smaller scale examples too. Lots of churches that have agreements to open as warming shelters or gathering places before people are transferred to other longer term shelter options. We also rely on first responders in our work just to give us a good sense of where needs are and where we need to be directing attention. And so we do a lot of just funneling information to local churches, to our partners, and then sometimes back to emergency management if we're hearing things from local churches that don't seem to be registering in the decision making. This is a second time that I'm going to make a pitch for disaster preparedness, though, because if you don't already know your emergency manager, it doesn't matter if you are pastor of the church. It doesn't matter how many letters you have after your name. They're not going to take your call. But if you have a relationship with them, they just have too much going on. They're trying to manage too many things to take calls from people they don't know. And so if you have a relationship, if you have agreements, if you have made some plans for, okay, we're right next to the hospital, how can we be a support there? We have chaplains who serve the fire department, how can we connect that way? We're a great facility for sheltering because we have showers, and we maybe have put in an emergency generator, and have taken some steps to be looped into those conversations to serve better, and not just in a kind of seat of our pants way.
Yeah.
Which the church does amazing work too, just seeing needs and responding, but we do it more effectively and efficiently usually if we've done some planning.
Yeah. Well, we would be delighted when the time and safety permits for you to come and look over our disaster preparedness. I know that it is true that preparation means all the world when we want to respond to an immediate need. Having done all of that groundwork is so critical, and so it's always good to even relook at those plans and make sure that those connections are still maintained.
Yeah. And this just reminds me, and I think it's cool, so I'm going to share it. One of the priorities for our Partners Through Church World Service is disaster risk reduction. And so seeing that vulnerable communities are usually the hardest hit and least served in the immediate aftermath of disasters, they have started including elements of disaster risk reduction and preparedness, so mitigation options and planning, in a lot of their work. And so I was visiting communities in Indonesia a few years ago, and they were doing emergency drills with the elementary school children and with the leaders of the community. And it was all out of this recognition that this was a really remote mountainous community. And if they had a landslide, which is likely in their area, it would be days before first responders would be able to get there. And so they would be the help. They would be the first responders. So getting some training so that they could do that well, that they could have some kind of triage first aid, that they could have evacuation plans, that they could care for one another until the official first responders arrived, was a really transformational thing for these communities.
That really strikes me because as we think about our commitment to here in our congregation, Caroline, we've done a lot of speaking recently about inspiring people to love like Jesus every day in their everyday living. And as you talk about this, in my mind, it strikes me the kind of preparation that we need to have in training, not only in terms of our inner work, but our skill sets to be able to best love our neighbors on the days where a crisis hits. And we'll definitely need to make sure to have you close at hand as we move forward to make sure that we're best equipped. Right now, it is a real joy to know that we have an outlet through Week of Compassion to again tap this vast network and know that when the first responders with the capital F, capital R first responders are there, and we need to be out, that we can still contribute by letting our resources flow through Week of Compassion to those needs. And that's just a real gift, I know, to our neighbors. Even here locally, I want to point out that we have had people within our very community who have received help from Week of Compassion. And so I just want to make sure that those joining us understand that this is global in the sense that we consider even domestically our our world to be connected in this way. And I so appreciate that that Week of Compassion has this balance of looking both here at home and globally.
And speaking of which, if any of your folks or any of you watching were affected by the winter storm, which hit Oklahoma too, please reach out to the pastoral staff, and they will be in touch with us, and we will try and get support funneling your way as well. Yeah.
Well, Caroline, I can't thank you enough for taking this moment this evening to be with us. I know you've got a lot of work ahead of you, even in your home state there. So you have our prayers and our blessing, both for that work and all that you all do at Week of Compassion. For those watching, I want you to know that that annually around the month of February, and in this case, this year through February, our congregation is taking up a special offering for Week of Compassion. 100% of those funds marked for Week of Compassion will go to Week of Compassion to be used at their discretion. And we trust them deeply to do that good work of being our hands and feet in the world. And so I hope you'll join us in giving to Week of Compassion this month and even on into next month. You can give that gift through our website, through our donate. If you'll put in the memo section to Week of Compassion, if you put in the memo section of a check or drop money by the office, any of those ways we want to collect our resources to gift to Week of Compassion as a partner and an extension of our ministry. Week of Compassion also has a text to give, and that's a great way to give. If you've got quick thumbs on the phone, you would text text WOC to 4144. That's WOC, Week of Compassion, to 41444. Is that correct?
Yeah.
41444. And so that's the way that you can give through the text to give. I'm so grateful for you to tune in to this first of the Overheard series. Caroline, again, thank you for your ministry and for joining us tonight. I hope you will tune in next week, same time on Wednesday, to have a conversation, to overhear a conversation between our lead pastor, David Emery, and Ron Nofziger, who spent his career in chaplaincy here in Tulsa. And they're going to be taking a look at the theme for that week around bitterness and its effect on our life. It's going to be a great conversation, so I hope you'll join us for that one. And without further ado, grateful for your time this evening. To all of you, may you feel inspired to live and love like Jesus in your everyday life as we go forward from this moment. So thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank you.